Is this going? This is going. The question for today is what is considered quality? Now, where I find myself asking this question is here in my room. Amongst all other things, I could talk to you about how I would imagine my room, or how I see my bed looking, or how I would want my room to look, or how I want my house to look. And what I recognize too is that this version of quality, this version of myself, is starting to go in a trajectory that I personally am very eager to feel, eager to experience. So as we all are, we come into this world, and there's just certain things that we might not have complete control over, like whether at the age of 1 you were involved in a particular religion, or if certain things were brought into your life that ultimately when you got older you said, oh, that way of life or that mindset I'm not going to accept anymore. And what any of this means, and what any of this is to say, is that as you get older you get a bit more in tune with what you consider to be quality. I find it interesting how, from me being 24 and then reflecting back about 12 years to when I was 12, realizing, okay, as basic as the quality of life was, the amount of joy and straight up happiness there was exponential. And then 6 years down that road, which led me to being 18, the quality of life was materialistically better, though spiritually and interpersonally was not projecting the way that the 12-year-old was living. And because of that sine wave period, it became a question of, okay, I can either continue to live this same life and have this materialistic, consumeristic quality of life, which was there when I was 12. It's just that I was more interested in uh, dirt bikes and the bare minimum going to the beach and playing with sand. That literally everything else was irrelevant. And being 24 now, 6 years after being 18, the amount of things that, for example, when I go to Costco and I'm walking through all the aisles and I'm realizing, man, at this same Costco 12 years ago, I would have made such different choices. And I don't know if the 12-year-old version of myself would have ever have thought that the 24-year-old version of themselves in 2025 would have ever have considered stopping or readjusting or renegotiating their own quality of life. And here's the fascinating analogy, and I'll just say these as I know them to be. Um, when you when you're out in public, and there's a particular dog that you witness, that dog is a reflection of the parenting that person not only instilled into the dog, that much is obvious, but that's also a reflection of what they instilled into their own family, their own children. So if by definition a individual who has been alive for 30 plus years is raising and nurturing a child, and they themselves have the mental maturity and have the functionality of a 12-year-old, then a 12-year-old is raising a newborn child. And we have to accept that because, in a very simple sense, how could a 12-year-old offer a quality of life to a newborn child if they essentially for half their lives have been living the same life. And there's nothing wrong with any of this. It's just this is something that I've observed to the point where I've been able to recognize, like, okay, if I'm eager to produce a life of my own, that also would imply that there are simple, basic things like, okay, for example, my kitchen, my pantry, my refrigerator. It's not that they wouldn't have any food in them. It's that there would only be quality food items in the fridge. And by quality, I mean that fresh produce, for example, would be in my homestead. It'd be on my farm. I don't know. Maybe some leftover salad could possibly be in my refrigerator, but realistically, I'd rather drink room temperature water. I don't plan on using ice. I haven't drank out of. It's been. I'll just tell it to you this way too. I haven't drank tap water in over 4 years. I haven't gone out of my way to voluntarily use a refrigerator as a storage device as I did when I was 12 for at least 4 years as well. My ability to sit here and be like, yeah, you know what, my closet. It's also a reflection of my mind. That's the kind of quality of life that I live, where in a very simple sense, and this is kind of also me just explaining my side of the story in the sense where if an immigrant gets into a new country and they don't have the wits about themselves to the extent that they can say, okay, there's this group of things that I wouldn't ever want a child to experience. So I'm going to learn what that is and why that is and how to teach them so that this child doesn't have to go through what I went through. That's a quality of life that I know I'm going to teach my family, my children. But in the essence of you listening to this, it's like how in the world are you supposed to be someone that knows any of this if you aren't someone that was taught any of this or are even aware that this is how it works? It's super simple. How you treat your car is essentially how you respect yourself, which is essentially how you respect the people you meet, the people you come in contact with. The quality, and I heard Brian Withers say this today, it's not about what you're looking at. It's about what you see and what you feel about what you're seeing. And so in that regard, sharing in my own way of the world, how and why is it that when I have chosen to focus on essentially being happy forever and accepting great things and positive things and things that bring me joy in my life, I've accepted those into my life, and that's the focus of life that I have, the being healthy and having time for myself and eating the what I would think of as the right foods and drinking beneficial sources of hydration. And then I realize that there's the rest of the world, and I'm not sitting here being like, oh, this is going to be a pity party for the guy talking to a microphone. But what I am saying is that there's people out there who are in this position who are like, yes, I'd like a completely different way of life. Or they're saying, why is it that I can choose a different way of life? and then everyone else around me just either doesn't care or either knows that it's possible and they don't do anything about it. And I heard the Greeks say something about this, and it was along these lines where maybe something along the lines of that it's better to not know than to know and not do anything about it. And that to me was, and he said it a completely different way. But what I will say is that there's a certain quality that you and I can both experience, but at the same time, that doesn't guarantee that the person to your right or the person to your left, the person in front of you, the person behind you, the person above you, the person below you is ever going to resonate with that. And today I kind of thought about this in the sense that as much as I know how good this feels, so in like a very literal sense, the best way I can explain this to you is for those of you who grew up receiving gifts for a holiday or a religious practice. Imagine the essence of every moment that you get to think about something, that you're receiving a gift every single moment, and you have that same elation to be essentially so grateful and so happy and so content that the thing that you wanted happened to show up. Simple as that. Now imagine that every moment. Some of you might be thinking, okay, what's another example? All right. Imagine you never been to a concert before. You happen to just be like, oh, my favorite band, my favorite music artist just so happens to be in my town. I'm going to go and show up, and the concert's going to be great because I get to sing my heart out to my favorite song lyrics and hear the band perform live or that song be performed live. Imagine that. But for every waking second that you get to live your life. And what I've essentially come to learn is that this notion, this concept, it might not be for everybody. Just in the same way that it's for me, is also in the same way that reciprocally, reciprocally, it would also imply that there are people who just don't get it. Just in the same way that there are people who essentially are humans who have a soul and are full of it, would also imply that there are humans that are soulless and aren't connected to it. And so we're talking about the quality of life. And so, just from my own experience, having had been someone that was like, you know what? Do these people know that there is a version of life that I'm living right now that can only be described or explained by pure experience? Do they care about that? And in some very simple, reasonable reasons, I'll just explain to you because, again, this is my experience, my channel, is I'm I've been someone who's grown up without really considering any measure about where my food comes from, how it's prepared. I grew up like that. And then the second that I moved out, it was like, okay, I realized that there was a elephant in the room when it comes to the overall quality of life one has and its relationship to the things that someone brings into their body, whether it's something that they listen to, whether it's something that they smell, whether it's something they apply on their body, whether it's something that they ingest through their mouth, or whether it's a thought that they entertain. And then I realized, like, you know what? What happens if I go out of my way to learn my version of all of these things? My life changed forever. Even though I recognized that the changes and the adaptations I was making were going to put me in a completely different headspace. I realized that that headspace I was moving towards was a personal journey and was a complete inside job. So, in the respect to quality of life, I recognize just in the same way that some people have the the love and the passion to be surfers, and they're thinking to themselves, out of all the things I could do with my life, being in the water, paddling, catching a wave is the straightforward best thing I could ever do with my life, point blank period. Is just in the same way that I go and I say, you know what? Out of all the things that I can recognize at this point in my life, with all the things I could do, by realizing and learning and adjusting my food routine and how I energize myself with nutrition and all that good jazz, I then have the opportunity to be myself. And it's not that the food in itself is a means to an end, but rather the joy of knowing that I'm doing the right thing is in itself that feeling, which is the end. The results and how I benefit from that is irrelevant from the practice of picking ripe fruit or tanning or removing microplastics from my body. Because the pure essence of taking action, which is first step number one, whether that's thinking or whether that's choosing to act or not react, then realizing, okay, this food habit that I have, we're gonna objectively look at the result, and if the result is favorable, if the result is personally favorable, then there's something to consider about what the result and the systems and the procedures involved mean. Okay, so what does any of that mean? What any of this means is that if by changing what I eat changes the way I can think and changes the overall awareness that I have about the things in the world, then I have to do what I have to do. And that quality of life, I'll just explain to you, is something that I had witnessed firsthand. I had also witnessed in the regard of essentially a secondhand story from multiple accounts. And what any of this means and what all this is to say is that if a whole bunch of different people from different places of the world can go about life in their own way, find their own keys, and end up opening different doors that lead them into the same building, then there's something to be said about that. And so when I realized, like, okay, I understand that there's a common result that people have. And I also understand that there is a common procedure involved with systems that people tend to have, and because of that they experience a certain quality of life. I'm going to go about my own way of finding that out. And when I decide to put my head up and take a break, take a breather, I'm going to look and see, first, am I in the same room as these people? And second, can people benefit off of this purely on the side that I'm not going to force them to do anything, but because I have this new information and knowledge, they would be better off even though they are not fully involved. So what does any of this mean? What any of this means is that yes, I did find myself in the same room. And what I learned along the way was something that I was able to then essentially put the ladder down and be like, yeah, you can climb this ladder and you'll experience these things. For example, sourdough bread. Very point blank simple. Sourdough bread is, as far as I understand, if there were to be a grain that is based in the fermentation process, sourdough bread is essentially the go to. And if there were to be a particular grain to be consuming, it'd be rye bread. Rye bread is, by definition, the most, what I would call, easy to digest food that is a bread grain, that is a baked item that I've personally ever had. And I was like, okay, this is a placebo. So then I went to a particular group of people and I said, hey, I'd like for you to try this. And the comments and the results, again, were along the same lines of what I knew to be true. So then this kept happening and happening with various different things, like with cold pressed juices and simple things like water, having it not be from your tap. It became this whole thing where it was like, you know what, this whole quality of life thing is, how do people, like, how do people take that power back? And beyond that, why wouldn't someone want to take that power back? Because the quality of life is so, to me at least, black and white, night and day, that I sit here and I'm gonna, like, I'm here reasoning with myself, saying I'm so happy that a person 6 years ago decided to start asking questions, because the person I am today gets to benefit off of a sacrifice made, where the quality of life that I experience today is full of passion and it's full of purpose and it's intentional. Whereas before, it's not that it was none of those, it's that the purpose and the intent weren't my own. And so all of this is really to say that for the quality of life and the way things can move and how someone can care about it, it's essentially to say that this is a complete way of life. Is if you put quality at the tip of your spear and that's where your drive is, then all you're going to experience is the best quality of life that you can. But having had been someone who didn't really align with that mental approach to getting up every day and being surrounded by gold, it was almost like I felt as if I was an imposter. And an imposter in the sense where it was, even though I was doing what other people were doing, I sat there questioning, A, why am I doing this? But then B, when it was all said and done, and then I was sitting there with the results, and I was sitting there saying to myself, is that really worth it? That's when I was realizing there was a bit of contrast happening, in the sense that I was It's my washer dryer situation over there. I was realizing there is a rapture, a literal like a little rebirth happening almost. That even though I'm sitting here saying to myself, I'd love for the people I care about to listen so that they can experience what I'm experiencing. I can't fish for them. And truth be told is that the whole selfish thing about life, I don't know why it's looked at the way it is. Because, in a very honest and simple sense, the quality of life I have today is something that I both see in other people, but then when it comes to me functioning as a person, this person who I am today, in a honest sense, can do laps around the people that already existed, my old versions of myself. And that's okay with me because I'm worthy of this quality of life, and so are you. It's just that it has to be a choice that's so conscious that insecurities and doubt, it's not that it's a waste of time. It's that your time is better used being positive and appreciating life than it is doing whatever it is that I or you did that was faulty or wasn't quality. So with that, we'll be moving on to what is the point of money. Uh, so take care. All the best.